I met Mush maybe 17 years ago as a young educator. We both were. She worked with Youth Speaks then and was just a phenomenal leader, educator, and poet that was able to help my young folks and so many young folks in San Francisco articulate what it was they were feeling, help them find words for it. And in that finding of words and in that naming, there was connection and affirming and normalizing of strong emotion that was so necessary for my young folks at 14, 15 years old as they were feeling so much. And so I'm so grateful, Mush, to watching you hold space and the powerful ways that you help young folks sort through what it is they are feeling. Mush is a poet, a narrative strategist, a pioneer of spoken word and pedagogy, Harvard University Project Zero Fellow. Mush frequently is featured a speaker in many different spaces and realms. She's a powerful leader, now the executive director of Youth Speaks. And so what an amazing journey.
It's really a joy to be here. Let me tell you something. Let me confess something very quickly, which is I am a go, go, go person. I am a runner. I'm the first in 30 generations to be born outside of Chosun, which is our family's ancestral home, in what was once a unified Korea, but now divided into two. So I inherit a lot of my almost chaotic, organized energy from my immigrant mother. And so this is a tremendous challenge for me, to be here, to be present, to not think about my ED life, to not think about my parent life, to not think about my teacher life, to not think about my organizing life. So I want to lay that before you to share that as I lead and host space, it's also, as we know, as educators, it's always a challenge and an invitation for us to grow and remember to practice what we preach. Yes. There are two concepts that I want to start with. We'll go into a workshop, but one is energetic reciprocity. This is a notion that Youth Speaks developed many years ago, but it's an ancient concept, and it's really hard to accomplish on a Zoom conversation. But it's a sense that, you know, when you see, all of us have probably been to some type of experience, whether it's a talk, a poetry, open mic, a theater performance, symphony, opera, any type of live engagement. When you hear something, there's like the hairs on your arm, kind of, they stand up, and then you feel almost like the whole room is suddenly elevated to another level of unity, energetic phase. Do you know what I mean? That moment where you feel the room lean in, whether it's physically or energetically or emotionally or spiritually. We call that energetic reciprocity. And it's the moment when somebody on stage shares and you feel it, it resonates, it's universal, you give it back. And then the person on stage understands, accepts, receives that, and gives it back, almost like a dialogue. And their energy is enriched. And our experience continues to be enriched. It's harder to do that over Zoom, but I do want to share that because I think that as educators, we probably all have some form of that exchange energetically that's happening in our classrooms when something happens and it feels really good, or something happens in a staff meeting or in a professional development thing, and it's like the room gets it, you get it, and a new level of understanding has just been unlocked. So I want to share that with you because I believe that one of the keys to getting to that place is this idea of life as primary text. And I'll write it in the chat, another concept that we practice at Youth Speaks, which is very connected to trauma-informed practice and culturally responsive practice. Everyone wants to talk about culturally responsive practice. In its simplest form, it is about the idea that we are the first and perhaps the most important story in any conversation about learning and teaching. Yes? We are the primary. If my story cannot be understood and read in any space, in any learning environment, then the secondary text feels conceptual, theoretical. Okay, so that's all the framework. I know this is not about frameworks, but I needed to share with you the way that I engage and have engaged in my practice for the last 20 years. So at this time, I want to invite you to please, if you don't have something already, something to bring something near you, writing utensil and or paper or pen. There's this concept of storytelling and poetry as being deep-seated and almost stuck and calcified in trauma. I believe that that is a pretty crappy narrative. I believe that I was listening to a talk this morning on KPFA featuring an artist, Ashara Akundayo, who is the founder of Artists as First Responder. And she was talking about the importance of spaces for women of color to have where grief is not shunned or shamed the way that, when people are angry or there's rage or there's, we feel upset, we're not shunned for it. But sometimes when we grieve and show vulnerability, the first thing we might say to ourselves or others who are witnessing our grief is, I'm so sorry, give me a moment, I'm so sorry. So there's an apology or an apologetic nature that not everyone, but sometimes it comes with us. And as I was listening to this, I thought, you know what? It's so funny to me because on the road to liberation, whatever that looks like for us, on the road of spiritual release and unlocking, on the road to being able to love and be loved fully with all of our crazy flaws and idiosyncrasies, all of that, that grief is actually a significant stopping point on any road to joy. Meaning it's not like grief is the end point and then we take out a new map and find out how to get to happiness and peace and harmony. But in order to get anywhere worthwhile, we have to move through grief. And so all of that is to say that I believe that there is that grief is an important friend on the journey to joy and happiness and peace and love. There are a couple grounding assumptions that I want to share very quickly. Stories matter, period. I'm not going to elaborate. We also arrive into this moment with a lot of complex histories and cultures, period. Also, the narratives that we tell ourselves today have the power to shape our future, no matter how silly people think words are, and no matter how much we try to justify. As a storyteller, how neuroscience has actually proven that stories are really, really deeply powerful in reframing and reshaping actually the material experience of our life. We can just assume narratives are incredible. I want to invite us to read and just sit with this. I won't read this out loud, but this is a poem by the 24th Poet Laureate of the United States, Ada Limon. And I'm sure there are many of us, and so each of us will interpret this in lots of different and interesting and maybe some hilarious ways. But the idea that sometimes grief is almost worth living for, it makes me wonder, where does that take you? It took me to a lot of places when I first came upon this poem. So, but we don't need to share unless you'd like to. But I'm curious about where your brain goes when you read something like this. I've been a poet and a storyteller since I was about 5 years old. I wasn't very good, but I tried. And if there's anything, I'm 40 now, if there's anything that I've learned, and I'm still relatively young, this is what all my mentors say. They try to shame me when I try to establish myself as a modern elder. If there's anything that I've ever learned is that the most important part of a story is about the start of the most important stories I've heard and I've told start with really good questions. And believe it or not, there are better questions than not. So today's exploration is, I'm not going to have you write long, monolithic poems. Maybe some of our brains are going to be automatically wired to say, how can I apply this to the group of educators that I serve? How can I apply this to the group of administrators and teacher leaders that I serve? How can I apply this to my next period? If it happens, wonderful. But I also want to offer something that Oriana invited me this morning with, which is an opportunity for you to show up without that educator hat, to show up as you and all of the different roles that you play in the spaces, because I think educators are some of the most underserved people on this planet. And so this is an offering just for you. Please, I hope you can receive. So here is a 10-word poem. This is the easiest barrier this is the easiest entry, removing the barrier into writing or feeling like you can write a poem. The only rule is that it must be 10 words. I'm going to invite you to take out your writing utensil now and a piece of paper or whatever. If it's a Word document, that's wonderful too. And we're really going to spend about 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll let you know. I'll just check in gently. No hard, fast time to this. But it's a 10-word poem, and the 2 rules are that it must be only 10 words. It doesn't have to be stanzas. It does not need to rhyme. It doesn't have to be about anything in particular. We won't share it necessarily unless you feel compelled to or moved to in the chat afterwards. The second rule is that I would love to invite you to write a poem in response to the following question. So please take a moment. Some of us are like, oh, this is amazing. This is great. This is easy. I wrote this poem 80 times, Mush. And some of us will be like, I don't know if I've ever been asked that. Some of us will be like, I'm also wondering that for myself, Mush. So however, your heart and your brain, wherever it takes you, 10-word poem that answers the question, who are you when you are loved really well? So the next activity, again, super easy. Another series of questions. This is all about you again. It's about who you are as a human being, as a person, as a lover, as a partner, as a friend, as a daughter, as a stepmother, as a foster parent, all of the things, as a poet, as an unrealized sculptor. All of that is fair. I'm going to invite us to write down 10 questions. And these are 10 questions that you can answer at some point in your life, some point today or not. The only thing is that each question should actually be a question, so not a response. So the first series of questions, please write down 2 questions that you recently discovered the answers to. You know, that's the one thing that poets, artists, writers, and educators have in common. Some of the best teachers I've ever had, some of the best lessons I've ever instructed were those where I had the right questions. Has anybody heard of Harvard Project Zero program? Kind of lab that studies the way that studio artists and visual artists think and create during their moments of, creation and work, and how that can be applied into our teaching and learning. One of the things that they do is they study the way that artists think. So this is a thinking protocol that a lot of artists use when they're analyzing kind of different scenarios in the world or different issues that they want to speak to. See, think, and wonder. Super easy. I've used this with middle school students. I've used this with adults, folks older than I have who've been in educating much longer. You can use this when you're watching a film, listening to music, and or reading experience photos or images. You don't have to write this down, but I am going to ask you to, I'm going to play a video, a poem from a friend of mine, but amazing, amazing poet from the South Side of Chicago, Maida de Valle. A couple years ago, President Obama invited a bunch of poets across the country in a White House, the first ever White House Poetry Jam. And so I want to play for you one of my favorite poems that Maida has done, and it happened to be at the White House. And using a see, feel, wonder protocol, just as you're listening, think about what you see, what you feel, and what you wonder.
Our common thread began in my mama's womb. Spun my fetus like a record in her cipher, sampled the stubborn and mixed in her father's posture. Our connection is full circle. Abuela, you bear of children. You seer of spirits. You are truly miraculous. You are the whispers of litanies and white tablecloths. Your melody is captured in the spilled candle wax of my skin. My tongue's a broken needle scratching through the grooves of a lost wisdom, trying to find a faith that beats like yours. What secrets do your bones hold? What pattern does your dust settle into when I beat these drums inside my ribs? What color was the soil of your grandmother's garden? Grandma, how did you pray? Did you store the memory of your creator in strands of hair tucked into scented soap boxes or placentas buried under avocado trees? What reservoir did you pull your faith from? Was it anything like this gumbo, this sancocho, this remix of rituals and chant samples from muscle memory and spirits that visit my dreams that I struggle to stir into discipline to honor the unseen with these shells, this sage, these rudrashka and rosary beads, these white candles, crystals, statues, this sweet water, honey, rum, and sweet grass? Abuela, how did you pray before someone told you who your God should be? How did you hold the earth in your hands and thank her for its fecundity? Did the sea wash away your sadness? How did you humble yourself before your architect? Did you lower yourself to your knees or rock to the rhythm of ocean waves like I do? Grandma, how did you pray? Some say faith is for the weak or small-minded, but I search for your faith everywhere. Need it to reassemble myself whole from these shards of Chicago ice and island breezes so I can rewrite the songs of your silence and pain, your lonely fist, broken tooth smile and burdens into a medley of mantras. Wish you could have shown me its shape, but I know it's in every sacred breath, in the shadow of trees that you visit me in the flicker of flames I stare into, searching for what's divine. And I know my body is the instrument my maker uses to rearrange the broken chords of your history into a new symphony for my unborn children's feet to dance to. And I see you, grandmother, gathering with your sister to chant the names of the living and the dead and remind us all that we're gathered in marble temples around a midnight fire or block party speakers. We have always raised our hands to the sky, trying to touch the invisible force that holds these cells together into a fragile mass. Children of different nations, but the same vibration. We be sound to beat, to base, to bone, to flesh. We be sound to beat, to base, to bone, to flesh. We are all truly miraculous.
And that is Maida Del Valle. So I want to invite us to unmute and maybe just kind of ignore the chat feature for a second, which is very controversial, right, in Zoomlandia life. But again, I come from an oral tradition. My grandfather was a pastor, and I grew up in the church listening to him speak. And so I would love to feel and hear a little bit of sound. What did you feel? What did you see? What did you wonder? I want to invite you to do one last thing, which is we walked through a bunch of questions, right? So you should have, if you're doing at least 50% of the exercise, you should have 4 questions. That's good. I want to invite you to please take a look at the questions, or think, if you didn't write it and you thought about it, please choose one, your favorite. And I'm going to invite us into a very brief writing exercise. Before we do, we all remember doing like the book reports. We all remember being like, OMG, right? Like, how am I going to start? That is the scariest place in the world, the blank page. Oriana has heard me say this a million times to her students. So we're not going to do that, because this is about trauma-informed, embracive practices. I'm not going to throw you off the cliff. So what I want to do is I'm going to show a series of photos. What I want to invite you to do is, on the side of your paper, on a separate scratch paper, please write for me what you see, what you think, or what you feel, and what you wonder. So we just did that thinking protocol with Maida's poem. Now we're going to move into a series of photos that really, to me, kind of speak to the moment that we're in. And so please write down one word: what you see, what do you feel, what do you wonder, as these images come up. And I'll just kind of spend about 10 seconds for each image. What do you see? What do you feel? And or what do you wonder when you see these pictures? First picture. Does everybody have their words? See, feel, wonder? And please do your best to use those words in a response to the question that you circled as your favorite. So if the question was, Mush, when is enough enough? Please attempt to answer your own question using as many of the words from the See, Feel, Wonder protocol. Those are the only rules. It does not have to rhyme. It does not have to be, there does not need to be line breaks. It is a journal for you and only you. I'll see you in 5 minutes. You know, it's healing to, you know, we talked about energetic reciprocity in the beginning. Some of us probably didn't even write anything. Honestly, to call myself out, sometimes I'm that person in the workshop where it's like, I can't do another workshop. So I'm just listening. But then there is still a reception of healing that I am privy to just by being there in the room and listening, that energetic reciprocity. So it's like the gift of healing through your story, both of the stories that I just heard. It's like, and that's enough too. That's the power of doing things together in community, whether it's grief, whether it's healing, whether it's questioning, struggle. Thank you, everybody.